Have you ever wondered how substances get into and out of your cells? How does the body move nutrients, gases, and waste around while keeping harmful substances out? Well, all of this is thanks to a fascinating process that happens across the cell membrane. Today, we're diving into the world of membrane transport, covering diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. By the end of this video, you'll have a solid understanding of how these processes work and why they're so essential for life. Before we dive deeper into these mechanisms, let's talk about why the cell membrane is so important. Every living cell in your body is surrounded by a cell membrane, a protective barrier that controls what enters and leaves the cell. This membrane is semi-permeable, meaning it only lets certain substances through. Now there are several ways materials can move in and out of cells. These processes help maintain homeostasis, allowing the cell to function properly. In this video, we'll break down three major types of membrane transport: diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. Let's start with the first one, diffusion 1. Diffusion, the passive flow of molecules. Diffusion is one of the simplest forms of membrane transport. It's a process that happens naturally without the need for energy. In diffusion, molecules move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. This movement continues until the concentration of molecules is the same throughout the space. Imagine you've just opened a perfume bottle. The scent molecules start concentrated inside the bottle, but as soon as you open it, they begin to spread out into the air, moving from the high concentration inside the bottle to the low concentration in the room. That's diffusion in action. The key thing to remember is that diffusion is driven by the concentration gradient. Substances move spontaneously down the gradient, trying to reach an equilibrium where the concentration is uniform. No energy is needed for this process. Simple diffusion works for small nonpolar molecules like oxygen or carbon dioxide. These molecules can easily pass through the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane. But not all substances can move this easily. That's where facilitated diffusion comes in. Let's move on to that next. 2. Facilitated diffusion, a helping hand. While simple diffusion happens with no assistance, facilitated diffusion requires proteins in the cell membrane to help larger or polar molecules pass through. These proteins act like tunnels, allowing specific molecules to travel across the membrane, following the concentration gradient. Think of facilitated diffusion like a VIP entrance to a concert. The cell membrane is the gate and the proteins are the bouncers, allowing only certain substances into the concert. For example, glucose, which is too large to pass through the lipid bilayer on its own, enters the cell through a protein channel in the membrane. It's still a passive process, meaning it doesn't require energy, but it's essential for transporting molecules that cannot easily diffuse through the lipid bilayer. Facilitated diffusion helps molecules like sugars and amino acids move into or out of cells where they are needed. Now let's move on to the next crucial process, osmosis 3. Osmosis, the diffusion of water. Osmosis is essentially a special type of diffusion, but instead of moving solutes, it's the movement of water. Water moves across the cell membrane through a process called osmosis, from an area of low solute concentration to an area of high solute concentration. For instance, imagine you have a raisin soaking in a cup of water. After a while, the raisin will absorb water because the concentration of water molecules is higher outside the raisin and lower inside. This causes water to move into the raisin to balance the concentration on both sides of the raisin's membrane. That's osmosis at work. Water molecules can pass through the cell membrane through special channels called aquaporins. These protein channels allow water to move more easily than it would through the lipid bilayer alone. Osmosis is crucial for maintaining cellular hydration and volume. It's also responsible for processes like nutrient absorption and waste removal in cells. But water isn't the only substance that can move through membranes. Sometimes cells need to move substances against the concentration gradient. That's where active transport comes in. For active transport, moving against the flow. Active transport is quite different from diffusion and osmosis. Unlike these passive processes, active transport requires energy. This is because active transport moves molecules from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration, which is against the concentration gradient. Think of it like swimming upstream. It's much harder to swim against the current, just like it's much harder for cells to move substances against their gradient. To make this possible, cells use energy in the form of ATP adenosine triphosphate. One common example of active transport is the sodium-potassium pump. In this process, sodium ions are pumped out of the cell while potassium ions are pumped into the cell. Both ions are moving against their respective concentration gradients, and it requires ATP to power the pump. This process is vital for maintaining the proper balance of ions inside and outside the cell, and it plays a role in nerve signaling and muscle contraction. Another example of active transport is the uptake of nutrients in the intestines. Even when there's a lower concentration of nutrients in the intestines compared to the cells lining the intestines, the cells use energy to actively transport these nutrients into the body. Without active transport, our bodies wouldn't be able to absorb the nutrients we need to survive. In addition to simple diffusion and active transport, cells also have specialized methods for moving large particles. This is where endocytosis and exocytosis come into play. 5. Endocytosis and exocytosis. Bulk transport. These processes involve the cell membrane engulfing particles to bring them into the cell or releasing them out of the cell. Endocytosis is the process by which cells take in large particles by surrounding them with the cell membrane, which forms a vesicle around the particle. There are different types of endocytosis, such as phagocytosis, cell eating, and pinocytosis, cell drinking, depending on what the cell is engulfing. Exocytosis, on the other hand, is the process by which cells expel materials. In this case, a vesicle containing materials fuses with the cell membrane, and the contents are released outside the cell. These processes are essential for moving substances that are too large to pass through channels or carriers in the membrane. These bulk transport mechanisms are crucial for processes like immune response, hormone secretion, and waste removal from the cell. Now that we've covered the basic types of membrane transport, let's discuss some factors that can affect how substances move across the cell membrane. 6. Factors affecting membrane transport. Concentration gradient. The difference in concentration between the inside and outside of the cell plays a major role in transport. The larger the difference, the faster the substance will move. Temperature. Higher temperatures increase the rate of diffusion because molecules move faster when they're heated. Membrane surface area. The larger the surface area of the membrane, the more substances can diffuse through at a time. Size and polarity of molecules. Small nonpolar molecules like oxygen can easily diffuse through the membrane, while larger or polar molecules may require help from transport proteins. Understanding these factors can help us better understand how cells regulate their internal environments and maintain homeostasis. Now here's a question for you. What is the protein that helps move water across the cell membrane? Only a genius can answer this in the comments below.